And so tonight, right now, I want you guys, we're going to be learning some information. I'm going to be talking about some information, but we're literally practicing it in the moment. And so tonight is our very first session, the power of presence and how to check in. And so right now, I want all of you to give yourself the opportunity to arrive here in the space. And when I say that, when I say to arrive in the space, I want you to notice that you can actually be somewhere else. And that arriving here is a skill. And that you have the ability to place your awareness here in the space, or for your awareness to be off where you were before, or in a story in your head, or drifting away. And you can bring it back into the space. And each time we practice arriving, we get better and better at actually being here, right? Coming back here, right? And so one of the skills that we'll practice over and over again is the soup breath. And so just go ahead and take a soft breath in your nose, like you're savoring the air. Go ahead and just arrive here in the space. I'm going to share my screen. And I also want to just remind everyone that I am recording this, and I'm only going to be recording the first 25 minutes. And that's the part where we're going to be talking about information before we start sharing more deeply. Okay, can everybody see my screen? Awesome. So we're going to start. I just want to review the structure. And so the 7 stages of a group. So no matter if you've been practicing in the Unshakable Man community for 2 years, or whether you're brand new, this is a structure that we teach. This is the structure that we practice. And as we practice this structure, we get better and better at allowing ourselves to open and to learn to work with what comes into the structure. And so that first step of arriving in the space. The second step is agreement setting. Okay? And we need to set these agreements in order to start to create a container where we can do deeper work. All right. And so the 3 core agreements are confidentiality versus secrecy, the intention for the space, and this has lots of different names for it, but my favorite 2 are cultivating a brave space or the paradox of safe space. And so number 1, first and foremost, I'd like to get a show of hands that can you agree that to keep anything and everything that's shared in this space confidential? Okay. While understanding that it's not a secret, meaning you have permission to share your relationship with what comes out of this space. You don't have to keep what happens in this space a secret. And in fact, we want you to share it with the world outside in order to complete the cycle, which is stage 7. We actually need to take what we learn in this space out into our life. We need to bring it into our relationships. We need to bring it into our job. We need to bring it into our journaling. We need to bring it into our personal practice with ourselves. Okay. And that's what inspired integrations is. Okay. So it's confidential, but not a secret. Everybody understand that? You don't have permission to share what another man says specifically. I want you to just notice, how does that feel? Do you feel something? Do you notice that you're starting to feel more open? Right? Like I can do something here that without that agreement, I might not be able to. The second agreement is the intention. And the intention comes in 3 parts. It's 3 legs of a stool. There's my intention, your intention and the intention of this specific group that we're in today. Okay. And this is always the case. And so the Unshakable Man community intention for the core of our practice is my intention is to create a space where I can practice skills to get out of my head and egoic patterns and to get into my body. This is a very different intention than what we might have outside of this space, or we might have in a training session outside of space, where my intention is to discuss, right? Or to go deep into a discussion about the philosophy of something, right? We're here to practice tools and skills to get out of our head and egoic patterns and get into our bodies. Right? And we'll notice that when we get into talks or we think we get inspired by stuff that happens in the space, this is why men group up together and have conversations outside of the space that are deeper. Because inside of this space, if we get too into the weeds in our head intellectually, then we start to get out of the practice of being in our body. And that helps us appreciate both. Okay, so can everybody agree that you're in alignment with that intention? You want to slow down and practice tools and skills? Okay. So now the third one is a paradox to manage. And the human experience, our reality, is full of paradoxes to manage, not problems to solve. If you want to read a wonderful book about this, that outside of the space to appreciate this, Solving Unsolvable Problems. It's a business book about all different paradoxes to manage in business. And so the paradox to manage here is that you are not responsible to interpret what I am feeling. I am not responsible to interpret what you're feeling. I'm the only person who can report on my experience. And so the paradox of safe space is that I am responsible to share what I am feeling. Can everybody here take responsibility to let other people know what they're feeling? Okay. So notice what that does. Right? And then we're going to move through. So we're actually doing stage 1 and stage 2 right now. And now we're going to move into stage 3, which is grounding. And then we're going to move into stage 2, which is learning how to check in round 1, check in round 2, check out round 3, and inspired integrations. But for now, I'd like to share, and I'd like to appreciate the purpose of each of these stages, okay? It requires a practice to slow things down, to come into the body, right? Our autonomic nervous system is constantly engaging with the world around us. Our body is a nervous system, right? It'll automatically trigger a fight or flight response. And so when we come into these spaces, it always takes a series of stages to get out of our head and into our bodies. And so each one of these, I want you to imagine them like a ring coming deeper and deeper into the space. And then we can work with something in the space. And when we get present, we often, I'll talk about this in the next stage, we automatically start to feel better. We actually discover by doing this work that we don't have to try to feel good. We automatically feel calm or creative or compassionate or courageous, these 8 C's of self-energy. And that is often for many men, when we've gone through the adaptive process of survival to get to where we are today, our life sent us a different message. Our life sent us a message that we have to actually be intense. We have to be aggressive. We have to have a protective front end. And our whole culture is built around this, right? With images of what it means to be a warrior, to be a leader. Right? And so, but when we learn this, it opens us up to be more flexible, right? To be more whole. And that's where the name Unshakable Man comes from. Right? Is to be an unshakable man is to actually learn to be with, to be open, to be able to expand. It doesn't mean to be rough or to be tough. You're actually being powerful, but it's an allowing process. So before we move on, I'd love to just come into our bodies and do a grounding. Okay. Well, actually, I don't want to do that because it's going to get us back into our head to talk about all of these things. But this is a learning process for me and for this community in only 2 hours, how to present the fundamentals of what we do. And so I thought it might be best to simply make a list and to go through these things, these topics, and to bring them to our awareness. And my hope here is that I inspire you then to want to go deeper, to want to have a deeper conversation about what these topics are. But then my invite is to bring what we discovered here into your practice in group, to connect what I'm talking about here to what you're experiencing in the groups and outside of the groups, okay? So if you notice any tension honoring your body right now around needing to understand this information, right? Like needing to get it right, I just want you to take a breath in your nose, out your mouth, give your shoulders a stretch. Just relax into this. Allow yourself to be curious, right? And if anybody has any questions, you're more than welcome to unmute yourself. I would love to engage on this for the next 5 minutes. So the number one thing, okay, that I want you guys to get, after 2 years of practicing in this community, this is the number one thing I hope men come away from in this, which is we can only connect to our life through our body. We can only connect to our life through our body. And I used the word only on purpose. I have spent my practice in this work for the past 7 years asking this question, and I feel, in my experience, I feel capable to say that statement. We can only connect to our life through the body. Now, let me explain how I came to that, okay? And it's not just me, okay? Your nervous system, right, is your nervous system. It is nervous. It is scanning the environment constantly. And that is autonomic. It is non-conscious. You are not it. You are responding to it. Okay? 80% of the nervous system fibers on or in your body send signals from the body up through your body, around your heart, through the vagus nerve, up through your neck, around your ears, to the brain, which receives the information and then does something with it and sends signals back down to the body. Only 20% of the signals go top down, and 80% of the signals go bottom up. A huge amount of information is coming in automatically through your body, and you are not consciously controlling this. Your digestion, your respiration, your eyes blinking, coming into a group of people, a group of men. Now, when we come into a circle, right now, I want you to look at another man on the screen. I want you to look at his face, just one man, pick one man on the screen. And now I want you to notice that while you're doing that, another man is looking at you. When we sit in a circle, of human beings, our nervous systems automatically, even when we're afraid, if we stay in the circle with each other, and then if we add in actively opening to receive and some practices to develop compassion and connection and attunement, my eyes are looking over Brian's shoulder. Brian's eyes are looking over another man's shoulder. I'm looking over Tim's shoulder right now. Rondell is maybe looking over mine. Someone is looking past you. Now I want you to imagine that you're sitting in the woods, and there's the possibility of having an animal come out of the woods and get you. Our nervous system knows that we can start to come into a state of rest and digest and tend in men, into a safety response when there's other human beings around us, when we are open to them. And that's what we do here. We're teaching men how to arrive in the space, how to set agreements, how to ground. Then this starts to bring our nervous system down into a state of rest and digest. And we're not going to get into the difference right now between the parasympathetic and the sympathetic nervous system. But our experience of our life, how we identify, is related to these states. I start to identify with these ways of being. But when a group of men go through an experience and we realize we can feel this other way, we carry that experience out into our life, and we realize we can show up in a different way. And that is the fundamental healing process of this work. That is why this work has to be done in a community. That is what you guys are learning to do right now, to carry that forward for other men who don't know how to do this. When we step into this space for the first time, for many men, their nervous system says, get the fuck out of here. Run. Shut down. Protect yourself. The simple act of being with that man and having the courage and the knowledge and the skill to be with him is the work. We are not trying to fix or to change or to help a man. We're learning to be with each other. And the main reason why we're not trying to help is because if I try to help you, in some way, I am saying that I am responsible for how you're feeling, or that the way you are feeling or the way that I'm interpreting that you're feeling is bad or wrong. And there are no good or bad emotions. There's only constructive or destructive reactions. So the ability to be with a man, this is what brings us to what's called the Alan Watts backwards law. Wanting an experience to be different than it is a negative experience. Being with an experience as it is a positive experience. Learning to be with the experience and to expand our ability to be with it allows us on and in the body to have a positive relationship with that sensation on and in the body. And this is what we mean when we drop in, and why it will start to feel good to actually release things that we didn't know how to work with outside of this space, or that our relationships, other people in our life, tensed up or moved away from, which sent our autonomic nervous system the signal that, hey, what you're feeling needs to be suppressed. It needs to be pushed down. Okay? But as I say this, guys, everyone here is at choice. You don't even have to participate. And that's the dynamic thing in all of this. You actually can be here and you can choose to participate, You are at choice. And if you don't have to ask permission to get up, to leave, or anything. Everyone is here is at choice. It's just a requirement of this book. And so that brings us to co-regulation. That's what we've been talking about here, is how simply by being with a man in this space, we are starting to co-regulate with one another, and we're learning how to be with that experience. And now interoception is the term, the clinical term for the skill of feeling into the body. And I just want to point out that I have read over 20 books on emotional intelligence, had them stacked here and had to clear out the bookshelf. And it is scary to me that only 2 of those books talked about interoception. And this is another thing that we're seeing in this work, is that many of the people who have done emotional intelligence research were doing emotional intelligence research, not emotional awareness research. They were looking at emotional intelligence from an intellectual perspective. They were cutting out the body. They were cutting out the relationship of the practitioner from the patient. Even those words make disconnection. They were cutting out bodyfulness and making it into mindfulness. We translated somatic practices into mental practices because we didn't have a word in the English language that related to bodyfulness or the body, the nervous system. But now what you're going to see in the next 5 or 10 years is all of this stuff is coming into what is happening on and in the body, because we are finding clinical ways to measure and to track that, and to know that trauma and emotions are in the body, they're not in your head. And so that brings me to what is an emotion. Okay. We do not currently have a definition of what an emotion is. Emotions researchers do not agree on a clinical definition of an emotion. The best definition that we have for a working definition is from Dr. Eve Ekman, who did a 10-year research study with the Dalai Lama on just what do emotions researchers agree on. And they couldn't even agree on the number of emotions, right? Because language has to do with it, emotional vocabulary. If I don't have a word to describe the physical sensation that's happening on and in my body, is it not happening? No, I just have a reduced emotional vocabulary. And that's another thing you learn in here. If you increase your emotional vocabulary by listening to another man and watching him and being with him as he labels what's happening on his body. Okay? So an emotion is a physical sensation that's happening on or in your body that the mind is consciously or subconsciously aware of, that's sending a message to the brain that something important is happening to the body's well-being. An emotion is a physical sensation that's happening on or in our body that's the mind, not the brain, the mind is consciously or subconsciously aware of, meaning emotions can be happening when you're not aware of it. Right? Or you're aware of it. And then it's sending a message to the brain that something important is happening to the body's well-being. In our community and our somatic practice, an emotion becomes a feeling when I label it with a vocabulary word. So the sensation on or in my body, that what I am feeling right now, notice I'm going top down. I'm using a label for my mind to label the sensation. But that is just the tip of the iceberg. It gets so much more vast and deep and expansive than language. We don't even need to talk in group to allow an emotion to sequence. And so then what we discover when we come into the body, when we work in this work, the more we do it, is we discover through direct experience that there are no good or bad emotions. There's only constructive or destructive reactions to an emotion. And so being angry in our relationship with anger, we had experiences in our life and we have a relationship with that. And so we learn to respond to anger in a certain way. So when somebody is angry in group, we are going to notice a sensation on or in your body. And then you may notice a story in your head or an impulse. And the reason why we have a structure in our groups is to create a brave space, to create a space where we can learn to be with what is happening on and in the space. And this is why the structure is so important in order to be able to create that brave space. If we don't have the structure, and we don't have the skills, and we don't have the agreements, and all of these layers, then what we need is we need to make a safe space. We have to have rules like we do outside of these spaces to keep people safe. But in here, we're actually learning to release, to allow this stuff to come up and out. And we do have agreements around them, right? Like we are not projecting anger at another man. We're working with anger in the space. And again, this is why this requires skill. So number 9 is, who are you? And again, we're not going to have a philosophical discussion on this, but in order to do this work, we end up stumbling on having to have a conversation about this. And in this work, we discover that we are not our thoughts, that I am not my thoughts because I'm aware of my thoughts. I am not my story because I'm often held in by my story, or creating a story, or writing a story, or talking about a story, telling a story. I am not my body, but I experience my life through it. Okay? I'm not my relationships. I'm not my actions. But yet, so often in our culture of manhood, I am told words don't matter, only actions do. You're only as good as your last result. You have to push, you have to show me what you're bringing to the world. But I am actually not my actions. I'm experiencing my life through my actions. And so across many wisdom traditions, and especially in the somatic practices, the definition that we use for who am I is I am that which is experiencing. I am that which is experiencing. And so I am awareness. And I can bring my awareness into my body, or I can bring my awareness up into my head through an idea. Okay. I am awareness. One of my favorite meditations is I am loving awareness. I am loving awareness. And he simply says over and over again, I believe it's Alan Watts, so says over a mantra, I am loving awareness, as you drop into the body. And that's where that comes from. And so we're learning to open, to allow, and to work with what is in the space. And so today, I want you to notice the sensations on and in your body in relationship to what's shared in the space. And I want you to notice the automatic story in your head, or the impulse that's triggered from the moment in space. And I want you to notice the opening and the closing of your body. And while I've been giving you this presentation, I want you to notice how different it is, how different it feels after I stop lecturing to you, how much different it feels to check in. And what that is going to show you is something called attunement. It's one of 9 components of emotional awareness. Okay. Again, something I'd love to talk about, but we're not going to go into. And so finally, how do you feel about being in group? After you're in the group, just check in with yourself. I want you to notice how you feel and where that came from. And the final piece, the final statement is something to experience, something to experience. This is the phrase that is said over and over again in the practice of pure awareness and many somatic practices from all different kinds of poetic ways. And the reason why they have to use this poetic language of something to experience is because if I tell you what you're going to experience, I in some way will affect what that experience is. And that experience is not a thought. The experience isn't a belief system. It's not a mantra. It's not a piece of artwork. It's a felt sensation honoring your body. And it has to do with what is in the space, what is brought into the space and what you bring into the space. And so we use these phrases. That in these somatic practices, we're learning skills to create structures, to create an empty space, to learn how to work with something to experience. And that's what we're doing in the group together. If you go into the practice of pure awareness, the wisdom tradition, the practice of somatic meditation that I suggest everybody in our community go and get creative and get inspired to try, you'll notice that you're learning a structure to create an empty space, just like we're doing here, but you're doing that alone. And so our core teaching tonight is how to perform the 3x3 check-in. And I think all of you here, everybody in the space has done this before. And so this is going to be a great opportunity to review. And then I'm gonna just review this for 3 minutes, 3 minutes, and then we're gonna turn off the recording. Well, actually, I would love to just get a show of hands, and if anybody wants to send me a private message, just so that there's no, if you feel safe to let me know. I would love to maybe get the first round check-in on the recording together. I think it would be of immense value to men in the future to hear. Get to do this together. So if anybody doesn't want me to record that, I can take it out later. Just send me a message, please. Okay. Everybody hear me say that? Awesome. Okay. So how to perform the 3x3 check-in. First thing I want you to notice is that this isn't about doing it right. It's about having a structure. And once we learn the structure, it's like walking to work. It's like going on your same loop, right? That you go for a run on. The more you get to learn it, the more you can lay in, you can relax into it, you can let go. Okay. But the structure provides something for you, a mirror for you to see some things in. And these things that we want to notice are sensations on and in our body, how our body is in this present moment, which is not a thought and it's not a concept. It's something to experience. We're always coming into the body, tapping into it, going deeper into it and finding out what is it like in it. And the second we think we know, we've gone up into our head. And there's a wonderful answer from Dr. Reggie Ray in the practice where somebody asks him, how do I know when I'm in my head? And how do I know when I'm out of my body? And he said that it's the second you're aware of the question, you're on the edge. And then once you're in the story, you're out of it. And so if you notice the question, you're still in there, you can just drop back in. I just love that. I love that answer. So we need these structures. So when we practice this together, the other end of this, the next stage of it is you are receiving a man's check-in. I am checking in for myself, but as I check in and I get out of my head and into my body, you are in turn invited to do the same. And so when I notice something outside of my body or in my body, that's an invite for you to maybe notice your relationship with that, right? And so formative language, there's 3 layers to the check-in. The first one is the script itself, right? Like learning the script. The second one is noticing the language that we use to describe our experience, which is called formative language. And the more attuned we become to our formative language, the more acutely we can start to describe our relationship with our experience. And this comes in 4 main categories. So I can amplify my experience, I can suppress my experience, I can make judgments about my experience, or I can tell stories about my experience. All of that is verbal. Okay? And I can embody it, I can breathe into it, I can move my body, I can allow tension to sequence and move, move my wrists and my hands, right? And so that's the conscious breathing portion. So as you check in, learning how to hold your body and to move your body to allow yourself to come into a dignified yet relaxed position, which tends to be with your hips slightly raised above your knees, your pelvic girdle rolled forward, and your backbone coming up slightly straight with your shoulders above your hips, your ears above your shoulders, your chin down and teeth apart. And your head, tip of your head raised. Go ahead, Ben.
Hey, I have a question.
Yeah.
Can you speak a little more in regards to the formative language and in terms of how like the amplifiers, the suppressors and all that affect the sharing of your experience, or like how it's processed as you're voicing it?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. The one of Eve Ekman, one of the phrases that comes to mind is in her cultivating emotional balance, said anything more than 3 words becomes theology. Right. So once I start describing my experience, the more words I start to use, the more I get out of the embodied experience, and the more I get into a story about what I was experiencing, let's say. But I want to I want to create another space for rhythm, for singing, for yelling, for anything that allows you to channel, right? Like to fully connect to, and from a somatic perspective, and to share what you're experiencing, especially from culture to culture, right? Because my culture that I was brought up in is very different than other men's cultures, right? And some of us talk with our hands and things like that. But I think the key here for me in this is that amplifying and suppressing and judging and telling a story is not bad, and it isn't good. There's nothing wrong with doing it. What we're doing here is by creating the practice of checking in with dry yet descriptive language, you're becoming aware of your tendency to unconsciously amplify or to unconsciously suppress. A man today that I was checking in with said, I heard him say a little. I've been a little overwhelmed. I've been a little tired. I've been a little rushed. And on the second time I mentioned a little, I paused and said, "Hey, it's okay if you want to use these suppressors, but are you aware of it?" And his next was, "It is a little," but his tone shifted. Like he owned it. He's now knowing consciously that he's saying a little. And my adjustment is not me telling him that he's right or wrong. It's me showing him that I'm receiving him. I'm listening to him and asking him if he wants to connect himself to that state. The other side of it is that as we get more into the body and start to work with more and more subtle sensations, everything is coming from the bottom up. There is a steady flow, energetic flow from the pelvic girdle, from the hara, from the pool piece, from your root, right? I'm trying to give it all different names to provide a spectrum here, right? The place where our nervous system comes in below our above our anal sphincter muscle, behind our groin and behind our lower intestine. That space from there up through the backbone, behind the heart, up behind the neck, there's this constant, steady upward flow of energy that we are discovering, that we're tapping into. And I think then we use phrases in our language like something coming up for me. There's been something coming up for me. That's what we're talking to, is that there's something coming up for me. And in this practice, as you develop your practice and you move through, make this somatic journey, this is another reason why I say we don't have to try so hard, is because we are learning to tap into and to come into the body, to be with what's happening on and in the body. And it is coming up and out. It's going to come up and out on its own. If we learn to work with it, to be with it as it comes up and out, we're going to have a different response. If we suppress it and repress it, it's going to come out in behaviors or in addictions or in just ways that craft or contort our personality. Right? And so you don't really have to go in so hard. To come back to formative language, what we'll notice is when we're working through a process with a man in group, when we're working with subtle forms of sensation in the body, if I say a little bit of sadness, it might very well be a little bit of sadness. But am I, by calling it a little bit of sadness, is my language holding it in that space? Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah. And so, yeah, and this is where your ability as a fellow practitioner, in the next stage, we're going to talk about, in the third week, we're going to talk about the 4 roles of the group. And so there's hosting and facilitating, opening, guiding, and witnessing. And then if you're guiding me into my body, when you talk to me, you're helping me let go. And this is why we say, I got you. And so when you say, I got you, in some way, you're letting my frontal cortex, the part of me that thinks it needs to be active to stay safe, you're allowing that to relax. And then when you ask me, what am I feeling in my body? I can actually pour my awareness in there. And then your invite to me, your creative, inspired, loving awareness to say, hey, can you allow that to come up in your body? Can you allow it to expand? How's it sequencing? What's its texture? How does it feel? All of these questions give me something to relate to, right? And that's the beautiful dance, right? That's this part where we are working together. I hope that wasn't too off filter. Are you guys feeling connected to that so far? Feel free to give me a thumbs down. Tim, are you? Are you in? I'm trying to read guys' body language right now. All right.
I'm good. I'm in. I'm still following. It's a nice reminder. It's been a while.
Yeah. Beautiful. Beautiful.
The one thing that I noticed that you said that brought things up for me again was having somebody make me aware of the unconscious things I was doing to mute myself, like you said, a little, those amplifiers and the suppressors, right?
Yeah,
Like not being aware of saying or doing something, just subconsciously downplaying my experience because
yeah,
it's what we're taught and trained to do. And then, you say that to somebody else, you're like, whoa. I remember going through that several times on some of the check-ins in the past.
yeah. Beautiful. Thank you for that. Does anyone else have anything you feel inspired to share, just to engage on? Um, Anything at all that related to what came up? Go for it, Ben.
Yeah, Brian checking in. Um, I, uh, I raised my hand because I learned to do that in elementary school, and it's been pointed out to me in these men's groups that I raise my hand all the time. I can't break this habit, but anyhow, it's not one of my bad habits. I just wanted to talk about the power of this lesson. That I've been a part of men's work and this network for 2 years, and I have no middle ground on learning. Either I'm really quick and on target and on top of it, or I'm totally clueless and slow. And on checking in, I was totally clueless and slow, and it took me 6 or 8 months. So this lesson is, and I was and I'm into it, and I was looking forward to it too. Even though I believe I've learned how to check in, I to have this structure is extremely valuable to me. And again, I could wish I had it 2 years ago, but I'm glad at least I have it now. Thank you.
Brian, what did you see as you developed your relationship with the check-in? Did you notice anything about your own skills in checking in? Change or?
I had no experience, I mean zero, with the idea of somatic checking in and being in tune with my body. I was one of those people who was totally separate. So
Mhm.
even though I didn't think of the last long period of time with you and the men as somatic experience or somatic learning, in effect, over time, that's what's happened. So it's been a very gradual thing. So that I do notice that even when I'm not in group, I'll experience something on the street or in my travels or a doctor's office or wherever, and I will all of a sudden notice that I'm having a reaction in my body, and I'll hit the pause button and think about it. So, it's yes. So those are the kind of practical results. Besides, hopefully I'm more effective in the group too, with with participating and joining with the other men, and helping each other be present. But I've been learning.
Yeah, I
It's
think
taken a
you have.
while. I learned.
Mike, I'm thinking about you right now, but the last thing one of the things that's come up is this idea of doing it right. And I wonder if maybe you have anything you want to say about that, of like doing these things right.
Thanks, Chris. Yeah, that's been a lifelong learning lesson for me. And something that comes from my family of origin is that I've always felt like I have to do things right. And the great thing about somatic learning is there is no right or wrong. There is only being. And so it's been an awesome experience for me to be a part of this, because I can just be me. I don't have to worry about whether all you other men are judging me in this, because you're here holding space for me to be me. And so there is no right or wrong. I don't have to do it right. Is that what you were
And
looking for? Is that kind of what you were looking for,
and
Chris?
and I was I was I'm aware of that as we try to learn these, we are trying, right? And it is so important to me to just remind that one of the beautiful things about this work is that these structures are empty. Their structures are, the structure itself, what we're learning here is empty. And another word for that is it's unconditioned, right? These things are so simple and that they're unconditioned. And so we see our relationship in them. And so when you said there's no right or wrong, for me, what I reframed that into was there's what gets the result that you're looking for you and for the group. And so that's why this is always dynamic. It's always flowing. And so if I am in the group and if I notice a man goes off in his check-in and I notice that when that happens, I feel tight, and then I lean in and then I try to tell the man what to do, right? It's like, let's just look at what is the experience, what is happening on and in my body right now, right? We're always emphasizing the present because whatever is coming up in the group is what the group is meant to work with, right? And in this way, we're learning to be dynamic, right? We're learning to work with a man as he is, right? And so even that man's share, even if he went off script, right, goes off into a tangent, we can learn something, we can see something in it. By having a structure, we get to see when we step in and out of it, and we could be creative, right? Or we can pull back and come back to the grounded, the core practices that we're teaching. But I want to just bring up that right and wrong, because we're at a stage where you guys here are going to be passing these tools on to other men. And it's just not about right or wrong. If you want to try changing the 7 stages of the group, go for it. But I will say that these have been refined over time for a reason. It will change everything about the group to make changes like that. So I'm gonna just call out a shift that we're stepping into our check-in round 1, unless anybody wants to share or say anything before we step into that. Anybody feel ready? They really want to say something? And we're gonna do our first round check-in, and then right after we end, we all get to check in. I'm gonna turn off the recording and we're gonna start our group, and we're gonna leave we're gonna use the end of check-in round 1 as the transition from our talking about the work into doing the work in the group. And for anybody who might be listening to this later, who I just want you to appreciate the men in this space and their choice to be vulnerable and to be open and to share this in this way. And yet I also want to just let you know that what happens after, the reason why, and I'm saying this to you guys too, is to keep the sanctity of what happens in that space, to allow us to practice. In my experience, it's not something we can really do if we're recording with the idea that it's going to be shared, because the idea makes it into, like, in some way, someone might feel like they're acting or might be seen or a bit unable to be vulnerable. Does that make sense, guys? A distinction while we're cutting it off at round 1. Awesome. And because we're going to turn off the recording, I want to talk about the what's happening as we move through these stages with our protective parts and the importance around checking out. Okay, so the arc of the group, and this is pointing toward what we'll get into as we continue the practice beyond our fundamentals, beyond 4 groups, is each time we check in like this, we're learning to trust the container and the space inside the container. The men in the space, it's not just us, it's our protective parts that are learning to trust us, to relax and to let go. And we are taking a risk of vulnerability. It is a risk to be vulnerable, right? It is a risk of living, of living your life to open, right? And there are real things that happen to us outside of this space that have told our bodies and our nervous systems that it is unsafe to be vulnerable. And we've cultivated these protective parts. And so when we arrive, when we ground, when we set agreements, and I'm noticing we didn't do a grounding today. So I'll ask that we start to just, all the men in here, just start to inhale in your nose and out your mouth. And just start inhaling in your nose and out your mouth. Is that when we check in and when we check out, we are showing our protective parts that they can trust us, right? Because we open the barn door, we close it, right? And in a way, what this shows the parts of us that are here that they can set aside and start to trust us is that if we didn't close it, then in some way we're somatically sending a message to these parts that this isn't, I really can't let go. I can't really fully trust this container. And so that's why it's important to always check out. All right. Okay. Guys feel ready to do a check-in? I'll go first. Remember, there's the structure, the script, there's my language, and there's my conscious breathing in my body. Okay. So my name is Chris, and I am checking in. I notice a pair of socks on the floor. I notice the sound of the wind. And I notice one seagull flying past the window along the horizon. Physically honoring my body. I notice a tingly sensation along the back inside of my neck, around my right ear. I notice I just swallowed. And I notice my facial muscles, the smile on my face just went away. And I feel my body relaxing. Emotionally, I feel creative. I feel flexible, and I feel friendly. I'm Chris, and I'm checking in. I'll pass it on to Chris.
Thanks. This is Chris checking in. Notice a COVID test sitting on my desk. Notice my car key. And I notice a blackberry bush growing over my fence. In my body, I notice warmth on my cheekbones and my forehead. I notice I'm sitting with my feet on the balls of my toes, with my heels off the ground. I feel my stomach pressed into my waistband as I breathe in. Emotionally, feeling tired, feeling connected. And I'm feeling at ease. This is Chris checking in.
Thank you, Chris.
Yeah. And I'll pass it over to Mike.
Thanks, Chris. I'm Mike, and I'm checking in.
Just invite you guys to open to receive Mike's share.
I see a basket of BDUs. See a dog-eared piece of paper. And I noticed shine on the handles on a bureau in front of me. In my body, my feet are sweaty. Feel the warmth in my lap from where Quantum was sitting. I have a itch on my left forearm. Emotionally, I'm feeling open. I'm feeling curious. And I'm feeling contemplative. I'm Mike. I'm checking in, and I'll pass it to Timothy.
I'm Timothy, I'm checking in. I noticed the skyline out the window in front of me. The books that I have behind my computer. And condensation on the outside of my cold glass of water. Physically, can feel the base of the seat, the cold base of the seat against my leg that I've been hooked up against, like the physical sensation of hooking it. I feel the constraints of the chair that I'm in. And I can feel like I'm unbalanced, like physically, my shoulders for some reason. Emotionally, I'm lost. Searching. And open. Tim, and I'm checking in.
Good to be with
I'll
you.
pass it. I'll pass it to Londell.
Thank you, Timothy. This is Londell checking in. I see the orange strip lights on our front porch. I see a fig leaf plant on the wall, on a shelf on the wall. And I see just a ginormous television in front of me. I feel my ankles crossed, sitting on top of the ottoman. I feel a cat's head on my wrist. And I feel the calming texture of this leather couch. Emotionally, I feel present, aware, and alive. This is Londell, and I'm checking in, and I'll pass it to Max.
Thanks, Lundell. This is Max. I'm checking in. Around me, I notice my cat purring, large rubber plant in front of me and my socks in front of me. And inside, I notice a little tension in my left shoulder.
A little.
Oh yeah. My slight discomfort, slight discomfort in my hip, but overall a relaxed body. Emotionally, I feel calm. I feel emotionally calm, curious about our exercise here. And that's about it. I'm Max and I'm checking in.
Good to be with you, Max.
Thank you. Did everyone go?
Brian.
Hold
We'll
on.
pass it
Oh,
on to
Brian. Hey, Brian, passing on to you. Sorry, Brian.
No, that's good. That happens all the time. But thank you, Max. The window treatments are closed. It's nighttime here. One of them is partially open, and I see that it's dark outside. And I know that it's autumn out there. Weather's changing, and I can sense that. So the warmth of all the lighting in here feels good. It's like summer inside here, and it's lighting up my art and my grandmother's plant, and things are clean and organized, which is unusual. And I am sitting in my chair at an angle, leaning to my right. My feet are hanging out oddly in front of me. I am tired. I am fed. Emotionally, I feel challenged yet competent. I know I have a feeling that I have work to do. It's Brian checking in. Back over to Chris, I think. Wilson?
Guys, what was that like? What do you notice in your experience? Has anything shifted for you?
I felt a little more questioning about myself for a second of like, am I doing it right? But what I noticed what was different in the feeling was I didn't care, but I had the question come up in my head, and it was almost kind of fun. You know, that I quote unquote said something wrong, like little,
Oh,
little this way.
when you
I was like,
said
oh,
when you said wrong, I felt
yeah.
tight, and I noticed I smiled, and I went, because for me, my experience, that there wasn't right or wrong. It was an opportunity for me to attune to you and to notice and to actually ask you if it was a little.
Yeah. Yeah, no, and my body felt loose, honestly. Didn't feel tense. It usually would feel tense when I think I did something wrong. Thank you.
Chris, I noticed when you mentioned the COVID test, my body winced and my shoulders went up, and I remembered it so much so. And then there's a story in my head of wanting to take notes to not forget the things I wanted to remember, and I had to stop myself.
Saw it, and part of me was like, do I say it? I'm like, well, it's what I see.
Yeah.
It's there. It's still part of our reality. It's negative, so I'm good. But
Brian, there was a moment where you were talking about your surroundings and you used the word unusual to describe the state that it was in currently. And I was just, it was something that struck me that I had a curiosity about, that you would share that even in observation of your existing state, something was perceived to be unusual to yourself and you wanted to share that with us. I feel like maybe there's a reason you wanted to share that.
Most of the time when I look around my space, and I give an honest assessment of it, I'm embarrassed to tell the guys that my place is like, my space is disorganized or cluttered or whatever. And I just happened to get up really early this morning and I had this burst of energy to like put things away and clean and, you know, to organize. And so I'm proud of it, that like for once, to me, you know, even
Yeah.
though you can see it, I can report honestly that my space is organized and clean.
When you said it with pride and not judgment, which is why I was interested to me. You
Oh,
didn't know,
yeah.
most people would say something like unusual or and downplay it, but you, that moment, you had a moment of like actual pride in that. And so I was just interested in it.
Timothy, what made you interpret what his said as pride?
Your physical interaction turned from your surroundings back to us when you started talking about it. You were kind of looking around, and then as soon as you said that, you turned back to the group and you just like became present again with the group. And I think it was a way of you physically sharing that and saying, yep, it's unusual for this to be in this state. But I'm happy and I'm that you seemed proud that it was in that state. And that's why I think I don't know if you were consciously or unconsciously sharing it, but it seemed like it just naturally came about and you
It's
shared it.
yeah, it's you have an accurate observation, and there's like and there's a story behind it which I won't go into,
Yeah.
because we avoid stories. But yes, there is a lot behind there. Yes, there's a. In fact, now that you've said that, I realize there's a whole lot behind there, and in fact, yes, I am proud of you know, the fact that, you know, I don't feel like a lazy son of a bitch. My space, the space I'm responsible for, this media space, is the way it could be.
Timothy, something I notice in your awareness of what you thought, your ability to attune and to interpret the way Brian was feeling was a great opportunity to pull him, if we were in group, and to be, Brian, are you feeling proud of your space? And at the same time, when you expressed what you thought, Brian had the opportunity to say your assumption was correct, right? Like your read on me, and I feel joyful right now and getting to witness them. Right? I'm connected. Anyone else have anything you notice that feels connected to share in just that first round check-in about what happened from before to now?
I found myself, so Timothy, as you were checking in, I felt very caring as you were speaking to how you were feeling emotionally.
I'm going to second that. I felt, Timothy, your share brought me deeper, and I felt curious about that. And there was something about your ability to express feeling. I don't know what the two words you said, but it deepened me.
I feel now that check-in is over, I noticed a difference in my body, that my headache is gone. My body is calm. I feel calmer. My stomach feels calm. I feel more relaxed and more centered. And I'll go back to Timothy, who talked about me. In particular, Timothy and Max being new, I was very curious about what they were going to check in and how they, not how they were going to do to evaluate them, just the fact that they were new, and I want to see them go through this like we've been going through it. So it was cool to have the new guys go.
Okay. Last opportunity to share before I turn off the recording. Londell?
I just wanted to say that I feel more connected because I've now heard everyone's voice. And B, I think for me, when I'm describing myself, what I feel and what my emotions are, I feel two things. One, that it may be shallow or surface level, or maybe that's neither of the right words I want to use. And I also realize that I'm being vulnerable, and I'm allowing myself to let someone into my world through my eyes. And so that for me helps to establish a certain level of trust and a certain level of closeness.
Thank you, Londell. And I'd love to just bring back in, like, notice for yourself how different do you feel checking in with yourself now than when I was speaking at you, right? And let us appreciate the quality, the sensational quality of that versus each of us moving through a check-in together. And that, if we appreciate the power of presence and how to check in, there's such a wild somatic difference between the intellectual information, right, of someone telling you what's happening in your body with the nervous system and these labels, which almost feels like you're having to take up energy. You have to stay focused on it in some way, or you move away from it, right? But when we check in, we automatically open, right? We're pack animals, right? And this is a skill, right? And to men who might be coming into this space, there is a layer of insecurity, fear, uncertainty, doubt, FUD, fear, uncertainty, doubt, that we have to cut through as human beings and people who identify as male or people who have been socialized as male, especially, of, oh my gosh, what is going to happen, right? And oftentimes us learning to hold this space is what is inviting men to come into it, right? For a man to work with what he is bringing into the space. It's your ability to trust yourself and to open and to hold that with a man that creates the experience of healing, of being with, right? And this is something to experience, right? Can't really tell a guy about this. So I'm going to turn off the recording.